Have you ever heard that having a cesarean birth could impact your milk supply and your ability to feed your baby human milk? Have you ever wondered why that's the case? What about having a surgical delivery could be impacting your milk supply? I'm here to clear this up, to help you understand the data and the research about this, and to help you understand what you can do if you are in this situation of having a C-section, to help you have the best chances of being able to feed your baby human milk, if that is what you would like to do. So let's get into it.
When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
First of all, let's hear some of the studies that are cited in Nancy Morbach's book, Breastfeeding Answers Made Simple. So there was one systematic review and meta-analysis that was done in China over a period of 15 years that showed that families that had cesarean sections were 47% less likely to be exclusively breastfeeding than those who had babies that were born vaginally. And in a study in Latin America and the Caribbean, 1/3 of newborns received other foods in the first few days after birth, and this was significantly more likely after a C-section. Another study was a longitudinal population-based study in Sweden, which has a cultural norm of breastfeeding. And it linked C-section with increased likelihood of discontinuing exclusive nursing by 2 months. So the rumor is true that it is likely that if you have a C-section, it will be harder to exclusively breastfeed your baby afterwards. But why? Why is that the case? So, some of the reasons that we guess about this are, first of all, there are post birth weight pattern differences between C-section babies and babies that are born vaginally. It takes babies who are born by cesarean longer to gain their weight back. And this often leads caregivers and healthcare providers to supplement earlier and more. And we know that earlier and more supplementation leads to reduced breastfeeding, especially when the family is not being supported by lactation professionals simultaneously who understand how to both supplement and protect milk supply simultaneously. So sometimes it is the case that we need that early supplementation. Sometimes it is not the case. So one example of this is that when a person has surgery to remove the baby, often IV fluids are given for extended periods of time. This also happens for long vaginal deliveries, might I add, vaginal inductions. Or often it happens when it starts out as a vaginal delivery and then switches to a cesarean birth for whatever reason. So IV fluids are given during the surgery. And if there are any more than 1,500 milliliters of fluids, that can act as a diuretic for the baby. So it inflates the weight of the baby. It acts as a diuretic. Then the baby pees, they urinate a lot more than they would typically, having just been born. And then that initial birth weight is inflated, and then that next weight is way lower than it would be otherwise. And so it looks like there has been a huge weight loss, and we're always looking to not lose more than 10% of the birth weight. That's that number we're looking for when we start to supplement with something other than human milk. And so, if there have been more than 1,500 milliliters of IV fluids given, you're almost guaranteed to get to that 10%. And often that is the case with cesarean births. Another reason why cesarean births often result in less milk is a difference in hormones. So, a parent who has had a C section, studies have found, shows that parent has lower levels of oxytocin pulsatility and blood prolactin in those first few days after birth. And blood prolactin is what tells the body to be producing milk. And oxytocin is what is telling the body to release the milk. And so, if there are lower levels of those hormones all together, the amount of milk that is there initially decreases, and then that impacts the baby's weight patterns. And then we have this cycle of early supplementation. The biggest contributing factor that can lead to decreased feeding of human milk to a baby born by cesarean section is a longer time until the first feed and fewer feeds per day. Let me explain. So, when we are looking at what causes the body to begin signaling itself to create human milk, which seems like a miracle, there are a few things at play. The body begins making colostrum at about 16 weeks pregnancy. It continues making that colostrum. Your hormone levels continue to change throughout pregnancy, so more and more milk is being created, colostrum. And then once the placenta is removed from the body, either through that cesarean or through being pushed out vaginally, the next step in switching from colostrum to lactogenesis 2, which is that full milk coming in, that mature milk, is that is done through stimulation of the nipples. That is the signal to the pituitary gland to release more prolactin into the bloodstream, which creates more milk. So every time the nipples are stimulated, the body gets the signal to make more milk, which is why in those early weeks and months, frequent stimulation of the nipples, ideally by the baby, but a pump or a hand expression will do as well, is critical to having a full milk supply come in. And we have seen in studies that the time, that first stimulation of the nipples, that first feed or that first pumping often gets delayed. And the timing of the first feeds is shorter. And this happens for a variety of reasons. Often, the practices in the hospital after a cesarean are to move the baby away, to be cleaned. Sometimes the baby needs to be moved off, rushed to the NICU for care. Sometimes the mother is not capable of holding the baby or stimulating her breasts right away. So, because of a medical emergency, and that is not the priority. And so they're trying to manage that medically. But sometimes it really just is that is not the culture of the delivery room. And so if you're thinking, if I need to have a cesarean, what can I do? to try to ensure that my milk comes in, you can request that you have early skin to skin contact as early as is humanly possible. And if you're not able to, you can request that you begin hand expression or pumping as quickly as possible and be a squeaky wheel. Request for lactation support as frequently as possible. Have somebody come in and help you get your phalanges properly sized. I do have an episode about that because there is a lot of misinformation, even amongst hospital-based lactation professionals. I see people come to me after they have been sized by hospital-based professionals or hospital nurses that have sizes that are generally way too big. And that's really important after a cesarean to make sure you're properly sized. So frequent hand expression or bringing the baby to the breast frequently is really going to help that. So the long and short of it is, and this is basically what Nancy Moorbacher says in her book, and I really like this. What we are discovering through all of these studies is it may not be the surgery itself that delays milk increase, but rather the timing of the first nursing sessions and the frequency of those first feeds. So if you can stimulate your nipples frequently, get baby to feed frequently, and have the stimulation necessary to get that prolactin flowing in your bloodstream, then you are more likely to be successful with nursing even after a cesarean. And the reason I decided to do this episode is because the last two podcasts both featured incredible guests who were able to successfully feed their babies human milk after cesareans. One was a twin story, a double twin story. This parent had two sets of twins, Lindsay Castiglione. She's an IBCLC now, but when she had her twins, she was not. And she was told, just rest, don't worry, you have time to pump. But she knew otherwise because she had read a book. So she started that, even though her babies were in the NICU, she started using that pump early and often because she knew that's what she needed to get a full milk supply in. And then my second guest, episode 71, was Molly Peterson. She's also an IBCLC, and she was an IBCLC before she had her first child. And her daughter was breech, and so she had an unexpected cesarean, and she was really worried about milk supply because she knew this data. And she just brought her baby to breast early and often, and she ended up with an oversupply, which has its own challenges. And she talks about that in the episode. So take heart. If you have questions about milk supply after cesarean or in any other situation, I would love to be the person who helps you navigate that. So reach out to me. My website is in the show notes, www.quabbinbirthservices.com. I can most likely bill your insurance so that you can get my virtual or in-person services covered. And if you have had a full milk supply after cesarean or not, I want to hear about it because these are the things that we discuss in my Milk Making Minutes community group. Please join us there so that we can support each other and support future generations feeding their babies human milk. See you there. Bye.